Tonight, Donald Trump's big day of tariffs. The US president is right now unveiling his grand tariff policy, and he's warned he's targeting value-added tax systems. Also tonight, where is Europe, asks Ukraine's Zelensky, as he warns he won't accept a peace deal if he's frozen out by Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. I'll speak to the former Defence Secretary Penny Mordaunt about what the UK and Europe should do now. Earlier, a surprise for the government as new figures show the economy unexpectedly grew at the end of last year. And we'll also have the latest on claims the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, was investigated over her expenses while working in banking. It's Thursday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Well, yesterday he left the world reeling after opening negotiations with Russia over Ukraine. And tonight, Donald Trump has set out more shockwaves over trade and tariffs. Well, in the last few moments, the US president has reportedly said he wasn't ruling out a blanket tariff across the world, and also said that some allies treat America worse than their enemies when it comes to trade. When it comes to Britain, who had perhaps been hoping to escape the brunt of Trump's tariffs, well, they might have to rethink that, with reports coming out of the Oval Office that Donald Trump considers VAT as a tariff on American imports and is prepared to reciprocate. Well, let's talk now to our business correspondent, Paul Calso, shall we? There's an awful lot to digest in the last 5 minutes or so. I can see you kind of frantically looking at the lines that are coming out from Donald Trump. But this is big news.
It is. It's been trailed. He's talked about tariffs, the most beautiful word in the English language, Sophie, you'll recall. He teed up this announcement today. We're getting it in bits and pieces from reporters who are in the room, in the Oval Office. We'll hopefully hear from him in full shortly. But essentially, this looks like total war in trade terms against everybody, as far as we can see. He's talking about reciprocal tariffs. So if America faces a tariff from a trading partner, they will get the same back, is what he seems to be implying. And he's not going to stop at actual tariffs, which are specific tax on imports on trade. He'll also look at where VAT is used.
Yeah, let's just unpick that a bit, because, you know, VAT, look, I'm not an expert here, but you wouldn't really think of VAT as being in the same bracket as a tariff. But obviously we have pretty hefty VAT in the UK.
If you look down the UK list of, you'll look at plenty, I've been looking at them in preparation for this evening, lots of produce it comes in from around the world. It doesn't face tariffs, but it does face 20% VAT. It's common in the EU, 20%. So he's looking at a broad approach with his Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, who says he's going to go country by country. What we wait to see is he going to level things up and put the same, if America faces a 10% tariff, will it be 10% back in return, or will it be broader than that? What's really interesting is this isn't confined to, America's got 20 trade deals with nations that it deals with, Canada and Mexico, chiefly. That looks like that's not going to make you immune from any action from Donald Trump. And I think we'll see, particularly, this will be a big deal for the European Union. He's complained about the ease with which, as he sees it, European cars are imported to the US. They face only 2.5% as a tariff. Cars going the other way into Europe are taxed at 10%, so we could expect to see that equalised. It opens up a great range of issues regarding China, clearly, in which is already in a tit-for-tat tariff round. All of this, remember, is above and beyond the tariffs he'd imposed in the opening few weeks of his presidency on steel tariffs, the Mexico and Canada ones that he's deferred. So as we get these details, the trick is going to be working out precisely what it means and where.
Stay with us, but I just want to bring you a couple of the breaking lines that we are getting, as you say, coming out of the Oval Office. The Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick has said that the study should be done by April the 1st, when they'll be ready to go. So this looks like it could potentially be happening pretty soon. Relevant to the UK, Donald Trump also saying that the EU has 20% VAT and other measures that hurt US companies, including Apple. I mean, it is worth pointing out, 20% VAT here in the UK if that was levied on British exports to the US, studies have shown that they think it would knock up 0.4% of growth, £24 billion. Donald Trump also speaking about Canada, a country that's obviously been in his sights an awful lot recently, saying that Canada has been tough on the military, not paying enough, and saying that Canada doesn't have enough military protection as well. He's also saying that Donald Trump is saying that we shouldn't expect any exemptions or waivers. And Paul, you know, it's worth, isn't it, reflecting on what this means for the UK, because that's exactly what the British government had been hoping. Absolutely.
I was with Jonathan Reynolds, the Business Secretary, this morning. He gave a speech about regulation, but we got an opportunity to ask him some questions about tariffs. The UK, like everybody else, facing these 25% tariffs on steel and aluminium. Now, most of the aluminium the UK exports to the US goes into defence, quite high-tech defence uses. And he was looking forward to there being a trade secretary confirmed in the US so he could make the argument that the UK should be exempt. Now, Donald Trump's position, no exemptions. Well, he's a negotiator, isn't it? And we often see that we've seen this in the early days of this presidency as trade as a negotiating tactic for whatever else he wants to get. The tariffs on China, after all, are under the cover, if you like, of a fentanyl concern he has. What is absolutely clear here is, as Donald Trump has said consistently, he said it in his first term and he said it through the campaign, he sees the trade deficit the US has, which is £920 billion, essentially as America being ripped off by its rivals. He sees it as ripping out manufacturing jobs and attacks on the US that is unfair, particularly from its allies, who we've been talking all day, haven't we, about the defence contributions the US makes, and he is making good on his promise to address that. But since you're saying he's going to go country by country and add barriers, whether they're tax, whether they're tariffs, whether they're other, he's talking about other non-tariff barriers that he will introduce. He's talking about something that will, at the very least, spread enormous uncertainty everywhere that does trade with the US, gum up the system, almost certainly add cost. Would he thought that US consumers are going to face inflation as a result of this tariffs policy? This will have it's not just journalists who are going to be looking at this evening, this would be every chancellery in Europe, around the world, be thinking, what does this mean for us? And it puts everybody on the back foot, which is probably, in trading terms, exactly where Donald Trump wants them.
Thank you very much indeed. Paul Kelso explained the latest to us. Well, we can cross now to Washington and speak to our US correspondent, Mark Stone. We're getting the kind of drip of lines coming out of what Donald Trump is saying. I think it's fair to say that it's sending shockwaves throughout the UK, but also across the world as well. Just summarise exactly what's happened.
Yes, it will, and we will hear from Donald Trump in a moment. It's happening, but it's being taped and not broadcast live. But as soon as we've got those comments, we will bring them to you. I think we're kind of catching up with what he's announcing at the same point at which governments around the world are also catching up with this. We knew that there would be some sort of reciprocal tariff announcement coming today, but no one quite knew the detail. The stuff on VAT, I think, is very interesting, and certainly many economists would argue that the Trump administration is kind of misunderstanding the way VAT works when it comes to exports, and that VATs are actually border adjusted, meaning that there's a rebate on tax exports and tax is imposed on imports. So in a sense, it kind of cancels the VAT out. They would argue it is cannot be compared to being a tariff. Nevertheless, Donald Trump disagrees with that assessment, and he is seemingly going to reciprocate as such. So from London to Brussels, interesting and important that those two centres of power are now separate thanks to Brexit. That could give London some advantage, it may hope, over Brussels. But from London to Brussels to the rest of the world, countries will be eagerly watching what Donald Trump is announcing now. And he's due to meet the Indian Prime Minister Modi, who is here in Washington this afternoon. There will be a news conference then. That will be key. I think we may get some questions to Donald Trump there. The other thing to tell you briefly, which I think is fascinating, is that Modi has had a separate bilateral meeting with Elon Musk. It took place in Blair House, the presidential guest house here in Washington, and Modi has tweeted about the meeting, saying it was a very good meeting. They discussed issues including space, mobility, technology and innovation. Well, some people would cry massive conflict of interest there. Blair House is an official US government institution. Elon Musk is part of the US government, clearly, and yet he has business interests in India. He wants to put Starlink into India. It currently isn't. He wants to sell Teslas in India. They currently are not. So a massive conflict of interest potentially there too.
OK, Mark, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's get some reaction now from Pat McFadden, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, shall we? Someone at the centre of the government, I should say here. What's your reaction to what we're hearing out of America?
To wait and see what it means. It's the best reaction to everything over the last month. Sometimes tariffs are announced, a couple of days later, they're unannounced. The sensible thing to do is to digest this, to speak to the Americans properly. That's what we'll do. I
mean, there's an awful lot to digest. He's talking there that VAT, in his eyes, should be treated as a tariff. Now, I mean, like, you know, you don't need me to tell you that, you know, 20% of tariffs on British exports to the US, that would knock 0.4% off growth. That would be a £24 billion cost. I mean, you know, forget the growth that we've seen today. That would wipe that out in a second.
At this and that consequence, the answer remains the same. The most sensible thing to do with all of these announcements is to digest them, see if they actually come to pass, and then decide what you do.
That's not actually true, though, is it? Come on. The most sensible thing to do is to work out an action plan of how you would cope with it. That is basically your job in the Cabinet Office, right? You're the kind of Mr. Fix-It of the government. So don't tell me you're just going to be sitting there and digesting it. You're going to be going back saying, oh, right, if he does this, what on earth is our plan? That's the truth, isn't it?
Well, of course you'd do that. Of course you'd do that. And you have to decide whether this is going to apply to all countries the same. Is it goods? Is it services? What does it apply to? There's a lot of unanswered questions about it, and that's the proper way to think it through.
I mean, look, and I do take your point that these things are sometimes kind of shifting stands when it comes to Donald Trump. Things can change quite quickly. But he has said tonight that there'll be no exemptions, which is what we were hoping for, wasn't it? We were hoping to be treated differently because we had a better trade balance with the US. I mean, that's kind of gone up in smoke, hasn't it?
Well, let's wait and see. Honestly, it's the right response. We took a decision to give you, a more broad answer to this, that we wouldn't breathlessly chase every headline that was coming out over the last month. I think that's been the right decision. I think it's in the national interest that we do that. I think it's in the national interest that we keep a good dialogue, both in public and in private channels, with the new administration in the United States, that we don't overreact to every announcement. That's been the right thing to do for the last month, and I think it will be the right thing to do going onward. What your viewers should know is that we'll always stand up for British interests. We'll always act in the British national interest. As an open trading economy, we want a good trading relationship, both with the United States, also with Europe, also with China, around the world. That's in our national interest to have that, and that's what will guide our policy.
There'll be an awful lot of people tonight who probably feel, quite broke. The last few years has been tough, and they'll be worried about what a 20% tariff imposed by the United States could do to the British economy. I understand if you don't want to tell me the plan, but just tell me you've got a plan in the circumstances.
Well, our plan is to make sure we have a good trading relationship with the United States, with Europe, with China, with everywhere that we need a good trading relationship, because that's what's in the national interest. What we won't do, which some of our opponents are encouraging us to do, is to say, we're not going to talk to you, we're not going to talk to you, we're only going to talk to one person in the world. That's not in the national interest. Precisely because we are an open trading nation.
Are you prepared to retaliate if Donald Trump imposes tariffs on the UK?
Well, I think that's premature. We'll
Well,
always...
it's not premature. Come on, this is
It is premature.
he's out talking about it tonight. I'm not
It
just
is
making these
premature.
questions up from anything. I'm quoting what the United States President
And
said.
how mature would it be for me to walk into a studio 5 minutes after some announcements and say, yeah, we're going to retaliate? That's not the way you make policy. We'll always stand up for the national interest. It's a government's duty to do that. But the best thing in the national interest is to maintain a good trading relationship with everybody that we need to maintain that with right across the world. Yeah, That's what's in Britain's national interest.
I'm interested in you sort of emphasising everyone around the world, because there are some who think now is a time to be hugging Europe tighter. Do you agree with that?
I think it's important we have a good trading relationship with Europe. That remains, in collective terms, our biggest and most important trading relationship, even some years after Brexit. The United States relationship is also really important to us. It's on goods and services. Services is often left out of these discussions. Britain is largely a service-based economy, although manufacturing and goods are really important to us too. So both of these are important. And the European relationship is really important. And we hope to improve the trading relationship with Europe in the years to come. That's what we're working on without rerunning the Brexit debate.
Donald Trump says that Europe needs to step up, particularly on defence, defending Ukraine, but also, frankly, on defending themselves. He's saying that they can't rely on America to do it anymore, that they should be spending 5% of GDP on defence. Do you think he's got a point that European nations do need to step up when it comes to defence?
I think for some nations, yes. I mean, the United States doesn't spend 5% on defence, by the way. But for some European nations, that's true. Britain traditionally has had a higher defence budget as a proportion of our economy than many other NATO members. We've been above the 2% current threshold for some time. The only time we reached 2.5% was under the last Labour government. We are producing a defence review shortly with a path towards going back to that. So Europe does have to step up and pay for its defence. But the defence relationship with the United States will also remain really important. And again, that's in the UK national interest.
He's been thrashing out a deal with Putin to end the war in Ukraine, an hour and a half on the phone, putting some meetings in the diary as well. Zelensky said tonight that, firstly, he wouldn't accept any deals struck without their involvement. And he's also been making the point, where is Europe in all this? I mean, has he got a point? Why is this being struck by the US and Russia?
Well, it's not a surprise that the new administration, the new president, was going to make a move on Europe. Remember, he got elected saying that he'd solve the Ukraine war on day one. So I don't think the move was a surprise, but it's really important for us as a big ally of Ukraine, as somebody who's supplied Ukraine with a lot of support in recent years, with the British public supporting to say that Ukraine should be at the table and part of the discussion. Even the Russians have said that today. That is really important because, remember, they're still fighting. There are still Ukrainian soldiers dying. 3 years on, people thought they didn't have a chance. What they've achieved in 3 years has been absolutely incredible.
I've just been told in my ear, which really does, I guess, show the live nature of this programme and this interview as well, that Donald Trump has said that he trusts Vladimir Putin and that he believes that he wants peace. Do you trust Vladimir Putin?
Look, I think the Russian invasion of Ukraine was an appalling act of aggression. That's why we supported Ukraine. It's been a bipartisan support between us and the Tories.
The question is, do you trust Vladimir Putin?
That's not the word I'd use after the aggression he has shown. And I want Ukraine to be part of the discussion about its own future. That's the least they deserve after fighting so bravely against Russian aggression in the past few years.
Donald Trump also said recently that, or yesterday it was, recently, it feels like a week ago, but it was yesterday, that Ukraine won't be a member of NATO, that the US won't be involved in peacekeeping forces in Ukraine. Will the UK be part of that peacekeeping force in Ukraine if it's necessary?
Well, one quote is Ukraine won't be part of NATO. The next day's quote is nothing is off the table. That's precisely why it's important not to react to every quote. In terms of any talks, I don't want to preempt the outcome. The key point for me, for the UK government, is that Ukraine has a proper say in talks about its own future. And I think it's important to remember they have to be party to an agreement because their soldiers are still fighting, their soldiers are still dying, and we, the UK, are still supporting them precisely because we wanted Ukraine to be in a position of maximum strength when this moment of talks came about, as it was going to at some point.
So if you're saying that, I'm asking the question because there has been suggestion, including by Keir Starmer to our political editor, that we would play a full role in peacekeeping talks. And I do feel that some people might find that quite nerve-wracking, I guess, or scary. Because, if you have a situation where Article 5 doesn't apply, which is what Trump's defence secretary has said, that you're not backed by NATO, that the US isn't backing those peacekeeping forces as well, then we're an awful lot close to a confrontation with Russia, aren't we?
Well, the other thing President Trump has talked about is peace through strength. And Putin will respect strength. And I think we should remember that in these talks. What's going to be seen as strength and what's going to be seen as weakness. And it's really important that there is peace through strength. And that's why it's important that Ukraine is in as strong a position as possible when it comes to whatever talks are about its future.
Throughout the interview, I think it's been pretty clear that you're saying, look, wait and see. Donald Trump says one thing, then he says another thing. Do you sort of trust what Donald Trump is saying?
Look, we want a good relationship with the new US president. I think we've started off on the right footing. I think not reacting to every quote and every interview overnight has been the right thing to do. I think that's the responsible thing to do. And I think that's probably the best way to have a good relationship with this new administration, rather than British politics being nothing more than a commentary on whatever news has come out of the United States in the last couple of hours, or in this case, the last couple of minutes.
Or as during the interview as well. Do you think that's a lesson for the media as well? Do you think we should stop hanging on to every word he says?
Well, that's a decision for you.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Pat McFadden speaking to us there. Well, let's bring in, shall we say, just to say that story is sure to feature in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the Liverpool Echo political editor Liam Thorpe and the writer and broadcaster Esther Craighew. Just to recap on what we've been saying, hearing from Donald Trump in the last few moments, that Donald Trump has been saying that reciprocal tariffs are on their way, including, we are told, with VAT treated as a tariff. Of course, here in the UK, we impose 20% VAT on goods. And so there is, of course, that suggestion that could impact the UK. Donald Trump also saying that there'll be no exemptions to this. He's also been speaking about Vladimir Putin, saying that he's somebody that he trusts. Let's bring back in, shall we, our business correspondent, Paul Calso. Paul, you've been digesting what Donald Trump's been saying.
Yes, Trancy. So we've had a few. I mean, we're getting bits and bobs, and we know Donald Trump takes a scattergun approach to this stuff, and so the information jumps about a bit. It seems to be that this focus on reciprocal tariffs, it's structured in so much he's going to counter specifically tariffs that come from other countries against the US. But he's also going to look to address the biggest trade deficit. So those nations from whom the US imports many more goods than it exports to. So that brings into focus China, most obviously, the European Union to a degree, Japan, South Korea. He's talked about Taiwan, which of course is geopolitically massively important as well as economically, given the focus on its chip production. Taiwan took our chip business away, and we want that business back, he says. I've got some numbers here which help us give us an idea of what these tariffs might look like. Interestingly, we heard from Mark Stone earlier that Narendra Modi is in Washington today. India levies tariffs of over 9% on the US. Brazil has very high tariffs. The UK's average, there's something called a weighted average of tariffs, 3.3%. The EU just under 3%. And Mexico nearly 4%, Canada 3.4%. Several of those countries, the thing that's interesting here is, they are, certainly those two, they have trade have free trade deals with the US. It only has 20 free trade deals because it guards its trading power very jealously. But it looks like Donald Trump is willing to tear those up. And I think it was interesting, your conversation there with Pat McFadden. The wait and see is, I certainly understand why he's saying that, to buy time, if nothing else. But as I spoke to Jonathan Reynolds, the Trade Secretary, this morning. He, I think, thinks the UK has a good case to try and get some carve out from what at that point were just tariffs on steel and aluminium this morning, in part because the UK has got a trade surplus with the US. And in a bit of a statistical quirk, America thinks it's got a trade surplus with us. Now, they both can't be right, but it's about how you measure services, financial services. But essentially, you know, Donald Trump's focus here is those countries where there's a deficit, where he believes it's effectively ripping off American consumers and undermining the American economy. The UK thinks it's in quite a good position, not just because of that statistical quote, but because essentially we are the losers, in Donald Trump's terminology, in that relationship. But if this is to be blanket tariffs, and particularly if he sees VAT as a tariff by another means and a green light to introduce reciprocally 20% tariffs going the other way, that is a big deal. We export 70 billion pounds worth of goods to the US every year. So the UK is in this, thought it might be in a sweet spot, and may still be, who knows where this goes, you know, outside the European Union, but in Europe, exporting largely high-value goods to the US, but not so much that we're offending Donald Trump's sense of fairness. Now, that might still hold, but this looks like, at the very least, the UK, like everybody else, is on the list for action.
I mean, he said it explicitly today, hasn't he, that there's no exemptions, that it's going to be applied to everybody. It is interesting hearing Pat McFadden, who was like, look, you know, our whole strategy here is to digest, is to not respond to everything. Things can seem one way, then change. But look, you know, it's fine to say that, isn't it? But really, they're going to be running back into the Treasury. They're going to be mapping out all these things. And if there is a 20% tariff slapped on British exports to the US, what kind of thing could that do?
Well, sure. I mean, to think about the luxury cars. So 80% of Britain's exports are cars, automotive. We have a declining but successful export business in largely premium vehicles, higher end cars. Think of JLR, Jaguar Land Rover, and the business they do. Well, those are going to be on the list. Those are going to be the kind of business that are going to be wondering, what does this mean? You know, we have a very strong medical and pharmaceutical business in Europe and the UK, particularly. They'll be wondering what this means, and the interesting. This isn't just this is going to be a headache. This is a headache everywhere, because he's going to go down the list. There's enormous amount of trade data out there. It's very accessible, and if people want to waste a couple of hours, they can enjoy looking at it. But you know, trade is truly international. We live in a globalised world. That's why prices are so low for so many goods. But he's going to go down this, essentially saying, I'm going to add costs to every transaction. And perhaps the real restraint on him here might not be what Pat McFadden and colleagues say or elsewhere in Europe. It'll be the impact on American consumers.
He's not going to care about what the UK government says, is he? I mean,
I'm sure the special relationship stretches even that far. But it is...
But US inflation, that's the thing.
Exactly right.
As you say.
Tariffs, they sound tough. They sound like they're hitting the people who are selling you the goods, but the people who pay them are the importers and consumers. Inflation ticked up to 3% in the US in the last few days. That is probably going to be the biggest restraining force on what is still not to reduce the impact. This is an enormous declaration of trade war on everybody.
And it's interesting you were saying there about the inflation figures in the US. Here in the UK, we're obsessively looking at the growth figures. That's what the government has asked us to judge them by. They were kind of almost celebrating 0.1 increase today, which, let's be honest, would be pretty much wiped out instantly and more if any of this comes to pass. And I think your point is important too, that even if it's not directly targeted at the UK, impacts on the EU, on China, on other countries around the world will also have a knock-on effect here.
Absolutely. We've heard the mantra, in all sorts of contexts. Stability is the one thing this government can offer, even if the policies they've introduced since they got in with a big majority have been pretty unpopular. But this is global instability in terms of what happens next. How do you make meaningful decisions when you have the rules being ripped up by the biggest player of all? So it will absolutely impact on. I'm sure they will still make the argument, though. At least that what is happening in the States is not happening here. You do know what you're going to get from a British government. You might not like all of it. You certainly might not like the employment taxes you're going to have to pay in a few months' time. But I suspect that will still be the argument, but it just adds another layer of complexity. Add the security implications that have been raised the last 2 years, and this is three-dimensional chess in which trying to deliver an economic outcome the government says is its priority and is probably the best way to make some of its problems go away.
OK, Paul, thank you very much indeed. Paul Calso talking through us there. Well, we are expecting to see and hear from the US President very shortly. He's been delivering these remarks about tariffs behind closed doors, but reporters are in the Oval Office with him while he's been speaking. When it's finished, they'll come out and then we will be able to show you what he's had to say. Of course, we're getting those lines coming across in live time from the people in the room, but soon we will bring you the words from the man himself, Donald Trump. Now, in the meantime, of course, European leaders and NATO allies are still digesting Donald Trump's bombshell yesterday in terms of Ukraine, saying that he's personally started negotiations with Vladimir Putin over ending the war. They've even booked in a couple of trips to each other's countries. His message to Europe, step up defence spending because you can't rely on America anymore. His message to Ukraine, forget NATO membership, it's not happening. And today the reaction has started. Here's the boss of NATO, Mark Rutte.
NATO committed to future NATO membership for Ukraine, but it has never been agreed that whenever peace talks would start, that peace talks would end anyway and always and definitely with NATO membership. That has never been agreed. It could be, but it never was that clearly stated.
Perhaps not a promise, but at last July's NATO summit, they signed a statement saying there's an irreversible path to NATO membership for Ukraine. So something's changed. The thing that hasn't changed, though, is Donald Trump, who has been completely consistent in saying it's not happening. He's also been completely consistent in saying European countries can't expect American protection either. Here he is in February last year.
One of the presidents of a big country stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, you didn't pay? You're delinquent? He said, yes, let's say that happened. No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay. You got to pay your bills.
So listen to that. I'm not sure why anyone's shocked that he's now saying not only do NATO countries need to spend more on defence, but he's also causing doubts over Article 5, that an attack on one NATO ally is an attack on all. The question, I guess, is, have others been listening? Here's how the then head of NATO reacted to those comments in February last year.
Of course, we are 31 democratic nations on both sides of the Atlantic, and as long as this alliance has existed, there have been different views and discussions also about NATO. And I'm confident that NATO will remain the strongest and most successful alliance in history, and I expect the United States to continue to be a staunch ally.
Perhaps worth pointing out that the only time that Article 5 has been invoked ever was by America in response to 9/11. But it really does feel like the alliances and international agreements made over the last 50 years could be about to be ripped up. And the most immediate consequence of that is Ukraine. Well, here's our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes.
Arriving at NATO headquarters, the US Defence Secretary is the man everyone wants to talk to about Donald Trump's plan to end Russia's war in Ukraine.
Well, it's a great morning. The United States is proud to be here.
Secretary Hegseth, isn't your plan for Ukraine actually a betrayal of all the Ukrainian soldiers who gave their lives defending the whole of their country? And isn't it just a reward for dictators who use military strength to take what they want?
There is no betrayal there. There is a recognition that the whole world and the United States is invested and interested in peace, a negotiated peace. As President Trump has said, stopping the killing. And so that will require both sides recognizing things they don't want to.
Ukraine's president has spoken to Mr. Trump, but only after the US leader had a long chat with Vladimir Putin.
We cannot accept it as an independent country, any agreements without us. I articulate this very clearly to our partners. Any bilateral negotiations about Ukraine, not on other topics, but any bilateral talks about Ukraine without us, we will not accept.
Nervous times for everyone here, almost 3 years into Moscow's full-scale war.
I don't think that I really trust any deals that Trump would make, and I do feel that we are being left out of this situation, of this discussion, and I feel like we shouldn't be left out.
I don't trust anybody of our government, neither Trump, neither Putin. It's all brothers from one family.
Tensions too within this transatlantic family, despite the grins. Pete Hegseth wants allies to invest a lot more on defending themselves rather than relying on the United States.
We must make NATO great again. This administration believes in alliances, deeply believes in alliances. But make no mistake, President Trump will not allow anyone to turn Uncle Sam into Uncle Sucker.
No time to lose then, if Europe plans to heed this warning and harden its defences. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, Brussels.
Well, shortly before coming on air, I spoke to Penny Mordaunt, the former Defence Secretary, about this. Hello, it's great to have you on the programme. Thanks very much for being with us. I know you've done a lot of thinking about Ukraine, as I'm sure many people have as well. Donald Trump has been opening negotiations with Russia on how to end the war. What's your response to what we've heard so far?
Well, look, I'm glad that things are moving forward, that conditions are being put in place to bring this fighting to an end. But we need to be open-eyed about this. We need to recognise that it has been Russia's stated aim to continue its expansionist agenda. It has named Ukraine, it is named Baltic states, it is even in some of its propaganda named Poland. And we have an opportunity now to bring the fighting to an end, but we have got to also deter Russia from any similar future action. And that's the key question that hasn't been addressed yet.
So in other words, it feels like we're almost rewarding Russia for its act of aggression rather than punishing it.
Well, look, Russia will see this as having made territorial gains. There's no getting away from that fact. And I think if you're going to ask Ukraine to make that sacrifice, you have to give her some security guarantees about the future. And what that means is not what colour berries will forces wear when they're patrolling the border. That isn't a hard power response. That's not going to provide a deterrent effect. It's not about giving Ukraine arms to defend itself, because if that's your answer to this, I would ask you, what the hell have you been doing over the last few years? It has to be about Europe saying, under particular circumstances, what it would do to rally to defend Ukraine. It doesn't have to be done under a NATO banner. But the positive effects of NATO is that, and why it's an effective deterrent, is because you know the rules of engagement. Russia knows what will happen if it takes a particular course of action. With European structures like the EU battle group, that doesn't exist. So if you want that deterrent effect, you have to create something similar.
So just to be really clear, what is it that you want to see in terms of security guarantees?
Well, I have asked people close to the administration about this, and they do recognise, the positive is they do recognise that there are security guarantees that are needed. They're less forthcoming about what those are. Clearly, they want European nations to be in the driving seat of that. But what I would say is that unless Russia understands what will happen if it continues this kind of action, then you don't have a deterrent. You don't have anything going to deter them.
What would happen? I guess that's my question. What are you saying should happen if Russia does continue being aggressive?
Well, Europe has to step up. Over the last few years, European nations, for very understandable reasons, have not wanted to get involved in the defence of Ukraine directly. Leaving Ukraine to defend herself against Russia by just supplying her with arms has not been effective. Look at the last few years. That is not going to cut the mustard. So if you were talking about a European-led action to deter Russia from doing this again, that has to mean hard power, and it has to mean a clear understanding for Russia about what would trigger that response. Very similar to the setup that we...
I'm still not really sure what the response is. You say it's a hard power response that Europe should step up, but could you just spell it out to me like I'm a child? What would that response be?
Well, that Europe would take a more direct action to stop Russia doing what it's tried to do over the last few years.
What is
actually
action?
Well, actually taking deploying its own forces, British forces, European forces, to aid Ukraine's defence. Now that, from what I can tell, is not being talked about. Commentators are saying, well, it would just be European nations supplying Ukraine with arms. But we have been doing that for the last few years, and it has not been effective. I mean, Ukraine have done a tremendous job. People thought this would have been over in weeks, and all credit to them. But the way this is going, Russia will conclude that it just has to keep going, and eventually it will make further territorial gains. There has to be a line drawn, and that is what we should be asking for from European nations as this negotiation proceeds.
Donald Trump says he wants defence spending in European NATO countries to rise to 5% of GDP. That would be another, I guess, around £65 billion for the UK, just to put it in context. Is that realistic?
Look, I think we were expecting this ask, and what others have said is that they will ask for 5 and they will settle for 3. NATO itself has been discussing internally moving to 3% commitment by 2035. But we know that we've had a 2% commitment in the past, and nations haven't met it. I think this is a wake-up call for Europe. We have got to do more spending on defence, but we've got to do more in other areas as well. We've got to have regulations, for example, that enable our industrial base to move at the speed that's required with the way technology is developing. We are no way near where we need to be in order to create those future capabilities. So this should be a wake-up call, not just for defence, but on our own national resilience as well, on combating terrorism too. We are not on the right footing.
I did, just to sort of change the subject slightly, I did read an interview with you recently, or a report on something that you've been saying, where you said you'd like to run again at the next election. So I just wondered if I could ask you a little bit about that. You've obviously still got the bug for Parliament. Would that be in Portsmouth, or are you open-minded?
Well, I'm back to square one, so I'm on the candidates list, Sophie. I'm not done yet, and I would love to come back. I've always said that. I think we're an amazing nation, and it's very frustrating sitting off the green benches, watching what's going on and wanting to contribute. But if there's one thing I've learned over the last few months, is you don't need letters after your name to make a difference. And I'll be doing all I can, particularly on issues like defence and the economy, to ensure that our nation is in the best place possible in the next few years.
It's interesting to hear you saying that it's been frustrating at times, not being able to be on the green benches and contribute. And you obviously ran for the leadership, so I imagine it must be slightly weird in a way to see somebody else's vision being enacted. So I guess I just wondered if I could ask about what you think the Conservative Party should be doing right now. Should you be targeting the Reform voters, the Lib Dems? What would you be saying?
Look, this is a team sport, so I'm not off the pitch. I do my bit. I'm helping Kemi and her team where I can, and I think she's doing the right thing. She's a toughie. She knows this is a very tough shift that she's got, but she's digging in, and she'll take the criticism, and she'll take all the difficulties about getting her voice heard in this particular time. But she's doing the right thing. She's got to do the hard yards to find real solutions to the problems that are facing this country. That takes a lot of work. And the Conservative Party is about taking responsibility, stepping up and doing things for your community, for your country, and encouraging others and rewarding others that do the same. That's what the Conservative Party is all about. Reform are not about that. The fellas in there have not taken responsibility for anything. And so I think she's right to focus on what she can do and what her party can do for this country. It's all about service in the end.
OK, great to speak. I'm sure we'll be speaking again in the coming months as well. Thank you very much indeed. Penny Mordaunt speaking there. Well, we are still waiting to hear directly from Donald Trump, but of course, lines coming out of the Oval Office in the White House as Donald Trump's been speaking to reporters, just as we await to get the video that we can play you of what he was saying. But on tariffs, we're hearing he's ordered his team to look country by country. It's what's called reciprocal tariffs. So the US will match whatever charge is imposed on their imports. He also said he wasn't ruling out a blanket tariff on absolutely everybody. And the other thing that is important from a UK perspective too, he said that he considers VAT to be a tariff as well, which, so in other words, the US could potentially reciprocate by putting a 20% tariff on British executives. Well, we are now seeing Donald Trump. He's also, I should say, been speaking about Russia as well, saying that Russia should be put back in the G7, saying that Putin is somebody that he trusts. Let's have a listen.
Country, they charge more tariffs than any other country. And, I mean, we'll be talking about that. But, again, whatever they charge us, we're charging them. So it works out very well. It's a beautiful, simple system. And we don't have to worry about, gee, we're charging too much or too little. But traditionally, India is right at the top of the pack, pretty much. There are a couple of smaller countries that are actually more. But India is a they charge tremendous tariffs. I remember when Harley-Davidson couldn't sell their motorbikes into India because of the fact that India, the tax was so high, the tariff was so high. And Harley was forced to build, I guess they built, I don't know, that was a while ago, but I think they built a factory in India in order to avoid paying the tariffs. And that's what people can do with us. They can build a factory here, a plant or whatever it might be here, and that includes the medical, that includes cars, that includes chips and semiconductors, that includes everything. If you build here, you have no tariffs whatsoever. And I think that's what's going to happen. I think our country is going to be flooded with jobs.
What should consumers expect? Are prices going to go up short-term,
well,
long-term?
Not necessarily. I mean, not necessarily, but I'll tell you what will go up is jobs. The jobs will go up tremendously. We're going to have great jobs for everybody. This is something that should have been done many years ago. China did it. I mean, China did it at a level that probably nobody's ever seen before. If you manufactured a car, you couldn't send it into China. The tariff was so high. So everybody went and they built in China. It was no big secret. So we're going to see, but it's going to mean tremendous amounts of jobs. And ultimately, prices will stay the same, go down. But we're going to have a very dynamic country.
But if prices go up, Mr. President, because of these tariffs, who do you think voters should hold responsible?
Oh, I think what's going to go up is jobs are going to go up. And prices could go up somewhat short term, but prices will also go down. And I think the farmers are going to be helped by this very much because product is being dumped into our country and our farmers are getting hurt very badly by the last administration. The last administration hated our farmers, like at a level that I've never seen before. I think our farmers are going to be helped. Jobs are going to be helped, but our farmers are going to be helped. Our manufacturers are going to be helped. And again, if somebody wants to come in, including the car companies, if they want to come in and build car plants, they'll do it without tariffs, and therefore prices won't go up. There could be some short-term disturbance, but long-term, it's gonna make our country a fortune.
So Americans should prepare for some short-term pain.
No,
possibly.
You said that. I didn't say that.
Well, if the prices go up,
Let's see what happens. Nobody really knows what is going to happen other than we know that jobs are going to be produced at levels that we haven't seen before. We know that we think interest rates are going to ultimately be coming down because of things that happen, and they go hand in hand with the tariffs. But we think that the prices for some things, many things, it could be all things, will go down. Ultimately, will go down.
Mr. President, can you explain the timeline here, sir? There's a period of time for a review, a report, 180 days. Sure. What's the earliest date that you think tariffs will actually be implemented and executed?
Well, I would say, maybe I'll ask Howard to answer that, because he's going to be the one that's implementing. What do you think?
Our studies should be all complete by April 1st. So we'll hand the president the opportunity to start on April 2nd if he wants. So I think we'll be ready to go on April 1st, and we'll hand it to the president, and he'll make his decisions. But remember, if they drop their tariffs, prices for Americans are coming down. Our production's going up, and our costs are going down. Remember, it's a two-way street. That's why it's called reciprocal.
Have you spoken to any American CEOs directly about this? Are they calling you and asking for
I've spoken to
exemptions,
many,
for
and
example?
many love it. And they say this is going to be the thing that makes our country really prosperous again. And this is going to be what pays down to $36 trillion in debt and all the other things. And this is going to be, this is an amazing day. I think this is going to be a very big day and in a very positive way for our country. Yes, please.
Mr. President, you've talked about the VAT and the EU before and your concerns with how the EU treats you. Do you have a number in mind on the European Union? Do you have an idea of where that number is going to land?
Well, what they are now is they have a 20% VAT tax, which we're considering to be similar or the same as the tariff. Plus, they charge lots of fees. And, you know, they're doing something else. European Union's been very tough on our companies. They sued Apple, they sued Google, they sued Facebook, they sued many other companies, and they're American companies, and the kind of numbers are staggering. And the court system over there is not very good to our companies. If you know that Apple had to pay, I think, $16 billion in a penalty, a court case that was really shocking, because most people thought they would have won that court case, people that watched it. So they've been very tough. Airlines have called me up and they said, could you help us with Europe, because they're charging us so many different fees. I got a call from the head of American, United, and other airlines saying, every time we land a plane, we get just absolutely killed by the European Union. And so they haven't been treated as good. You know, we think the European Union is wonderful. We all love Europe, love the countries in Europe, but European Union has been absolutely brutal on trade. Canada's been very bad to us on trade, but now Canada's going to have to start paying up. And Canada's been tough on the military, because they have a very low military cost. They think we're going to, you know, protect them with our military, which is unfair. So Canada's going to be a very interesting situation, because you know, we just don't need their product. And yet they survive off the fact that we do 95% of what they do. And Canada is just absolutely, I say it, and sometimes people smile and sometimes they say great idea, but Canada, their taxes would come down greatly, their security would go up greatly. Amazing things happen to Canada. And really, Canada in this particular, why would we pay $200 billion a year in subsidies to Canada when they're not a state? You do that for a state, but you don't do that for somebody else's country. So I think Canada is going to be a very serious contender to be our 51st state.
Mr. President, how long is the negotiation ongoing with Canada? There was obviously a delay in implementing those tariffs.
I spoke to Governor Trudeau on numerous occasions, and we'll see what happens. But it just sets up so good for them. Look, the people would pay much less tax than they're paying right now. They'd have perfect military protection. They don't have any military protection because and you take a look at what's going on out there. You have Russian ships, you have China ships, you have Chinese ships, you have a lot of ships out there, and you know, people are in danger. This is a different world today. It's a different world. They need our protection. Yes.
You mentioned Elon Musk and the efforts that he's undertaking with your authority. You granted him new authority this week. Will he secure any new government contracts while he is working on DOGE?
No,
for
not
you?
if there's a conflict. If there's no conflict, I guess what difference does it make? But we won't let him do anything having to do with the conflict.
Are you personally checking to make sure there's no conflicts of interest?
Yeah, I am.
He answers to you.
Sure, he does. First of all, he wouldn't do it, and second of all, we're not going to let him do anything where there's a conflict of interest.
Mr. President, your negotiations with the EU are there's discussions ongoing already. How quickly do you expect that you'll hear back from them about any of these other measures?
I can't tell you, yeah. The EU's been very nasty. It's just been, they haven't treated us properly. Look, we were great to them on NATO. Essentially, it's a similar group of countries. When I came in, my first term, I raised their fees. I mean, they were not paying. We were paying for, in my opinion, almost all of NATO. And now, you know, I had the bad moment with the press where the press said, well, does this mean you won't protect them? And I said, I won't protect them if they're not paying. But because I said that, the Secretary General, as you know, said it was the greatest thing he's ever seen because the money came pouring in. But they don't treat us right on trade. They don't treat us right on the military either. I mean, if you look at Ukraine, we're in for probably $200 billion more than Europe. Why are we in for more than Europe? We're in for more than Europe. I mean, think of it, or NATO. I mean, let's call it NATO because Canada's in. By the way, Canada is just about the lowest payer. Also, they shouldn't be. They are just about the lowest payer in NATO, in addition to everything else. So Canada's really been taken advantage of. And if they had to pay just something modestly fair, they wouldn't be able to succeed as a country. And that's why I feel they have to become a state. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. President. Is it your expectation that partners will offer major concessions and that you actually don't end up applying those tariffs?
No, I think that a lot of them will stay the same, and whatever they pay, I'll pay. I mean, we'll have a lot of them stay the same. I think some. Look, I heard as an example, EU lowered their tax on cars down to the exact same amount that they were much higher. They were approximately 5 times higher, and they lowered them down to the exact tax that we're charging. That took place like yesterday or the day before. Is that a correct statement? I think so, yeah.
Do you expect any exemptions or waivers?
I don't expect that, no. This is a simple system. I mean, there wouldn't be any. And in the case of Apple, I gave them a waiver, an exemption in my first term because Samsung was in South Korea. And Samsung didn't have to pay the tax because it was a tax on China. And Apple makes a lot of their product in China. So I did that because it wouldn't have been fair. But now this applies to everybody across the board. This is a much simpler way of doing it, much better way.
Did you, Mr. President, you had that major call yesterday with President Putin of Russia. President Zelensky responded today basically saying any agreements they won't accept unless they're made with Ukraine. Will Ukraine have a seat at that table for those negotiations?
Of course they would. I mean, they're part of it. We would have Ukraine, we would have Russia, and we'll have other people involved too. A lot of people, a lot of forks in the a lot of forks in this game. I'll tell you what, this is a very interesting situation, but the Ukraine war has to end. The young people are being killed at levels that nobody's seen since World War II, and it's a ridiculous war, and it has to end. We had a good talk with President Putin. I had a good talk with President Zelensky, very good talk. And somebody said, oh, I should have called Zelensky first. I don't think so. I mean, we have to find out whether or not Russia wants to make a deal. I know that Zelensky wants to make a deal because he told me that. But I now know that Russia wants to make a deal.
Did you ask Secretary Hegseth to walk back his comments yesterday saying Ukraine won't join NATO and won't go back to pre-2014 borders because those are bargaining chips you could use?
No, I didn't. Somebody told me to, but I thought his comments were good yesterday, and they're probably good today. They're a little bit softer, perhaps, but I thought his comments from yesterday. I thought his comments yesterday were pretty accurate. I don't see any way that a country in Russia's position could allow them, just in their position, could allow them to join NATO. I don't see that happening. And long before President Putin, Russia was very strong on the fact that I believe that's the reason the war started. Because Biden went out and said that they could join NATO, and he shouldn't have said that. As soon as he said that, I said, you know what? you're going to have a war now, and I was right about that. This is a war that would have never happened if I were president.
You don't think it's President Biden's fault, not President Putin? I mean, he's the one.
I think Biden is incompetent, and I think when he said that they could join NATO, I thought that was a very stupid thing to say. I thought when he said, well, it depends if it's a minor incursion. In other words, it's okay if Russia does a minor incursion. I thought that was a very foolish thing to say.
The
other thing that got it started was how badly Milley and these stupid people, the bad generals, how badly they did with Afghanistan. I was going to pull out, but we were pulling out with dignity and strength, and we were going to take our equipment with us and everything else. They are, I mean, what they're doing is, what they did with that, I think Putin looked at that mess and he said, wow, this is a great time, I'm going to go in. But what the Americans said, I'm not blaming Americans, but I will say what they said had a big influence on his deciding to go in. Yeah.
When Elon Musk met with Prime Minister Modi earlier today, did he do so as an American CEO or did he do so as a representative of the U.S. government?
Are you talking about me?
No, Elon Musk.
Elon, I don't know. They met, and I assume he wants to do business in India. But India is a very hard place to do business in because of the tariffs. They have the highest tariffs just about in the world, and it's a hard place to do business. No, I would imagine he met possibly because, you know, he's running a company. He's doing this as something that he's felt strongly about for a long time because he sees what's happening and he sees how the country is really being hurt badly by all of the fraud, waste, and abuse. Yeah.
So how does Modi know whether he's meeting with a CEO or meeting with a representative of your government?
Well, he's meeting with me in a little while, so I'm going to ask him that question. All right? I'll ask him that question. Yeah.
On auto tariffs, what should we expect, sir? You mentioned obviously steel and aluminum and pharmaceuticals. What are you thinking about auto tariffs? We haven't talked about that much.
I think autos are coming soon. I think they're all coming more or less at the same time. And it's not going to be a big shock to the system. But what it's going to do is it's going to bring pharmaceuticals back to our country. Much more important than the money. It's a lot of money, but it's going to bring pharmaceuticals back to our country. It's going to bring chips back to our country. It's going to bring automobile. We're going to do a lot more automobile manufacturing in our country. You know, when I announced this during the campaign, they were going to build the largest car plant in the world in Mexico. It was almost under construction. It was just starting. And when they heard me make that statement and they thought I was going to win the election, actually, it was a few months before the election itself, China was building the car plant. It was going to be the largest in the world. They immediately stopped construction. You can see the foundations there. They immediately stopped. When they heard I was doing this, that would have destroyed Detroit. It would have destroyed Michigan. This plant would have taken up more than almost the whole state built. And it would have been very destructive. When they heard me speak, and they said, wow, if he gets in, we're gonna lose our shirt. So they stopped building. That's the impact that tariffs have. Again, you know, I say it, and I say it loudly. It's the most beautiful word, but now I say religion, love, and a couple of other things are more beautiful because I got in a lot of problem with the fake news when they said, oh, other things are more important. God is more important, but these are the words. But I would say it's number 4 or 5. To me, it's the most beautiful. And I'll tell you what, I think really reciprocal tariffs, those 2 words, reciprocal makes tariffs really fair.
There'd be no exemptions, right? It would be all auto imports?
Any exemptions, no, because you don't need to. With reciprocal, you don't need to.
Mr. President, is Gavin Clegg just arrived at PRS?
Fox Radio. Do you have a update on the TikTok negotiations?
Yeah, we have a lot of people.
Timeline's running out, isn't it?
Well, I have 90 days from about 2 weeks ago, right? And I'm sure it can be extended, but let's see, I don't think you'll need to. We have a lot of people interested in TikTok, and I hope to be able to make a deal. I think it would be good. You know, people have learned it's very popular, and we'll have to probably get approval from China to do it, but we have a lot of people that are interested, and a lot of people, I think China will be interested because it's to their benefit too. So I look forward to that, but we have a lot of people that are interested in TikTok, quite a few.
Mr. President, Doge workers arrived today, Gavin Clegg and others arrived today at the IRS. Do you expect to close the IRS, or what are you expecting?
No, I don't expect it, but I think that the Internal Revenue Service will be looked at like everybody else. Just about everybody's going to be looked at. So it's they're doing a hell of a job. It's an amazing job they're doing. And you know, that force is building. I call it the force of super geniuses, but it's building. And you know, they go up and they talk to some of the people about certain deals, and the people get all tongue-tied. They can't talk because these people get it. They're very smart people. We need smart people. Yes. Brian?
On tariffs, sir.
Yeah, Brian?
Yes, sir. Mr. President, I know that during the campaign, it was huge in Pennsylvania as far as bringing back manufacturing. Have you talked to any CEOs since the tariffs were announced on steel and aluminum? What's the feedback from those guys?
They are in love with it. As you know, in Pennsylvania, U.S. Steel is through the roof. They're all through the roof. That's why I didn't want U.S. Steel to make a deal with Japan or anybody else. I think it's going to do great. But I think maybe more than anybody else, the steel companies and aluminum companies, they're in love with what's happened. And this will eventually be the car companies and chip companies. We have to have chips made in this country. Right now, everything's made in Taiwan practically, almost all of it, a little bit in South Korea. But everything, almost all of it is made in Taiwan. And we want it to be made. We want those companies to come to our country, in all due respect. You know, they took the business away. Taiwan took our chip business away. We had Intel, we had these great companies that did so well, and it was taken from us, and we want that business back. We want it back in the United States. And if they don't bring it back, we're not going to be very happy.
And you mentioned pharmaceuticals as well in China. That's national security to bring that back.
Yeah, China and other places. We want to get the pharmaceutical and drug business back into the United States, where it should be. Right?
Sir, on tariffs, are you concerned that the countries that would be most affected, like India, would just shift their trading to China?
No, I'm not concerned about anything, really. I mean, I'm just doing what's fair. This is a very fair thing. This should have been done a long time ago. I would have done it, but then COVID hit. I was getting ready to do this years ago, and first time we had the most successful economy in history, and then COVID hit, and this was going to be the thing that I was most waiting to do, but it was awfully hard to do this with Italy and France and Spain and all those people were dying, and then we put tariffs on. See, I have a big heart.
Sir, on Ukraine, when Putin says that he really wants peace, do you believe him?
Yeah, I do. I believe he wants peace. I believe that President Putin, when I spoke to him yesterday, I mean, I know him very well. Yeah, I think he wants peace. I think he would tell me if he didn't. I'd like to see peace.
Do you trust President Putin?
I believe that, I believe that he would like to see something happen. I trust him on this subject. I think he'd like to see something happen. I think it could have happened a long time ago. I think Biden, number one, it shouldn't have started, but it did. And now all those cities are knocked down, like demolition sites. All those beautiful golden towers are knocked down. There's nothing going to replace them. But much more importantly, you lost millions of people. A lot of soldiers, but you lost millions of people. When they knocked down those cities, and they're all laying down on the side, they're laying down just in ashes and all crumbled up concrete. They literally look like a world-class demolition site. And many of them, almost all of them, but many of them, and this should have been done by Biden years ago. This should have never been allowed to happen. I know he's a friend of yours.
But couldn't Putin just withdraw his
He's a friend of
today?
CNN. That's why nobody watches CNN anymore, because they have no credibility. Okay, who else? Yes, please.
Sir, if you can find a buyer in the United States for TikTok, do you think Xi Jinping will authorize the sale of it, or will
I'm going to make it worthwhile for China to do it. I think so. I mean, I got to know TikTok because during the election, I ended up with 36% higher than my opponent with youth. Okay, that never happened before. I beat, that's always been a Democrat thing, youth. It became a Trump thing. And I think TikTok, I think Joe Rogan was a part of it. Some of the great people that I did interviews with were a part of it. But I think that TikTok was I think it was a big part. Look, as you know, we were up by 36% with youth. The Republican was never up with youth. And I focused on TikTok, and I found it to be amazing, actually, and very fair. And I think the image of TikTok is different than it was before the election. I think people saw it, and they view it as a positive, not a negative. I think it'll be to China's advantage to have the deal be made, yeah.
How much money do you think you'll raise from tariffs on an annual basis?
That's the most interesting question. I think it'll be a staggering amount. It will be the external, I call it the External Revenue Service. That was a name that was devised by a few of us, but I think it's going to be a staggering amount.
We've heard it's the number 1 trillion floated in meetings with senators. Is that a number you've thought of?
I don't know, but already the Senate's saying, well, wait a minute, they're looking at some of the numbers and they're saying, whoa, look, we want to, I say America first, I say make America great again. That's what we're doing. I think it's the most important thing I've signed. I've signed some very important things. Right to try was so important. I mean, a lot of important things. Space Force, the biggest tax cuts in history. This could be one of the most important things that we've ever signed.
Do you expect the Russians and President Putin to attend the summit in Saudi Arabia?
Eventually, yeah. Not quite yet. It's a little early. They're having a meeting in Munich tomorrow. Russia is going to be there with our people. Ukraine is also invited, by the way. Not sure exactly who's going to be there from any country, but high-level people from Russia, from Ukraine, and from the United States.
Do you want to have Russia back to the G7, sir?
I'd love to have them back. I think it was a mistake to throw them out. Look, it's not a question of liking Russia or not liking Russia. It was the G8, and I said, what are you doing? You guys, all you talk about is Russia, and they should be sitting at the table. I think Putin would love to be back. Obama and a couple of other people made a mistake and they got Russia out. It's very possible that if that was the G8, you wouldn't have had the problem with Ukraine. And if I was president, you definitely wouldn't have had the problem with Ukraine. Russia would have never attacked Ukraine. But you ask a very good question, the G8. It used to be the G8 and then these people threw them out. And I was arguing with Trudeau and with numerous of the people. Actually, Prime Minister Abe, a great man from Japan, agreed with me 100%, and some of the others did too. But I got there, it was the G7, as you know. They had already been terminated. I think it would have been very helpful, and it still would be helpful to have Russia be a part of that mix. And I think if they were, I don't think you would have had the problem that you have right now.
Russia is part of the G20. They kicked them out, of course, because they illegally annexed Crimea. I mean, how would you have responded if Russia invaded or took over?
They took Crimea during Obama. 2014. They took, well, now they're looking to take the whole thing. Then they took a big chunk of land and people, as you know, during Bush. And now they're trying to take the whole thing during Biden. You know, the only one that didn't give them anything is Trump. They never took anything with Trump, nothing, not 2 inches of property of land. But Crimea was Obama. And then Bush gave him a lot, if you remember. And then, in fact, it's a sort of a standard little phrase. And Biden's giving him everything because this is a war that shouldn't have been had. And the only one that didn't give him anything is Trump. It's the way it is.
What's your message to Wall Street about these tariffs? So there's been some nervousness on Wall Street about the impact.
I mean, there hasn't been very much, and I think it's going to make the United States stronger, and in many ways it could make other countries stronger too. You know, other countries want to have a strong United States. They want to have a strong America, and I think it's going to make us very, very strong, much stronger. And we have a lot of work we're doing on the military. Our military already, I've authorized some contracts to be built that are very substantial. We're building the greatest equipment in the world. We have the greatest military equipment in the world. We're building it. At some point, when things settle down, I'm going to meet with China, and I'm going to meet with Russia, in particular, those two. And I'm going to say, there's no reason for us to be spending almost $1 trillion on military. There's no reason for you to be spending $400 billion. China's going to be at 400 billion. We're at $1 trillion. We're going to be at close to $1 trillion. And I'm going to say, we can settle this on, we can spend this on other things. We don't have to spend this on military and I'm going to be meeting with China. You know, we were trying to de-escalate nuclear, and I was in a position where Russia had agreed and China had agreed we were going to start, and then we had a rigged election, so that never took place. But this one was too big to rig. We won by so much that it was too big to rig.
You want to do the China meeting in the United States, or would you travel to China for that?
For what?
The China meeting. Would you do that here or
I
there?
tell people all the time, you know, the question is who's going to have the first meeting, where are you going to, I say this to to Putin, to President Xi. I say to everybody, never bothered me, you know. I'm willing to say I'll go first. It doesn't matter. It's the end result that counts. So it doesn't make any difference.
When do you want to have a conversation about global defense spending, you, China,
Well,
Russia?
I'd like to have that as soon as things settle down. I'm going to have that conference primarily with China and Russia because those are the two that really are out there. And we're going to have them spend a lot less money, and we're going to spend a lot less money. And I know they're going to do it. They agreed to it. We were talking about denuking, denuking, and President Putin and I agreed that we were going to do it in a very big way. There's no reason for us to be building brand new nuclear weapons. We already have so many. You could destroy the world 50 times over, 100 times over. And here we are building new nuclear weapons, and they're building nuclear weapons, and China's building new nuclear weapons, and China's trying to catch up because, you know, they're very substantially behind, but within 5 or 6 years, they'll be even. And we're all spending a lot of money that we could be spending on other things that are actually, hopefully, much more productive. Hopefully, there'll never be a time when we need those weapons. If there's ever a time when we need nuclear weapons, like the kind of weapons that we're building and that Russia has and that China has to a lesser extent, but will have, that's going to be a very sad day. That's going to be probably oblivion.
Do you see that as separate conversations, or do you see one giant summit with you, Xi Jinping, and Vladimir Putin?
Yeah, I could see that. Let things calm down a little bit. You know, when I left, we had no Middle East problem. We had no Russia going into Ukraine. They never would have done it. Putin never would have done it. And I came back, and we got like the whole world is blowing up. So when we straighten it all out, then I want to have one of the first meetings I want to have is with President Xi of China, President Putin of Russia, and I want to say, let's cut our military budget in half. And we can do that. And I think we'll be able to do it.
If Elon Musk identifies wasteful spending in the Defense Department, defense contractors and the like, are you willing to go after that spending as well?
We have to go waste, fraud, and abuse. Yeah, and we're doing that.
Could we, I'm just wondering about your conversations on defense spending. Would you want to do that as a trilateral, or would you use the existing body that also already includes China and Russia, the G20?
No, it's the people. It's President Putin, President Xi. I don't need bodies. I don't need anything. It's people. It's all about people. It's about relationship and people. And, you know, I've had a good relationship with President Putin. I've had a good relationship with President Xi. It's about people. And I think when things straighten out, which I hope will be in the not too distant future, the meeting I want to have first is a meeting with China and a meeting with Russia on slowing down, stopping, and reducing nuclear weapons in particular, and also on not having to spend the kind of money we're all spending on weapons, military weapons generally.
I think my question is, would you have those meetings separately with each of those leaders, or would you try to bring them all together?
Both. You start off separately, and that's what was happening. I was dealing with President Putin. We had really an understanding where we were going to denuclearize. What a beautiful term that is, right? Denuclearize. What a great thing if we could do that. And we were going to, he really liked the idea, and so did I. And we had then called China, and China was very open to it. And then COVID hit, and then we had a rigged election. But now there was no rigged election. Now we have an election that was too big to rig. That's what my whole theme was, too big to rig. And they tried, but they didn't pull it off.
Sir, as part of the reciprocal tariffs, would you also direct agencies to study the impact they would have on prices in the U.S.?
No, there's nothing to study. There's nothing to study. It's going to go well. You know, the United States is going to become a very, very strong economically country. Yeah.
Mr. President, in the past you have spoken against BRICS. India is part of BRICS. Do you want to dismantle BRICS, or you want to US want to be part of it?
I don't care, but BRICS was put there for a bad purpose, and most of those people they don't even want to talk about it now. They're afraid to talk about it because I told them if they want to play games with the dollar, then they're going to be hit with a 100% tariff the day they mention that they want to do it. And they will come back and say, we beg you not to do this. BRICS is dead since I mentioned that. BRICS died the minute I mentioned that. And I remember when Obama and Biden in particular, I guess he said that oh, they have us over a barrel. They don't have us over a barrel. We have them over a barrel. If BRICS wants to play games, those countries won't trade with us. We won't trade with them. And if any trading gets through, it'll be 100% tariff at least.
On your
What
cabinet,
would be your-
You know what? When they hear that, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to say, look what happened to BRICS. They didn't want to talk about it. They don't even want to admit that they were a member of BRICS. That's what's happened.
On your cabinet, sir, we saw Robert F. Kennedy Jr. get confirmed. He's going to come in here and be sworn in. Mitch McConnell has now voted against several of your nominees. He voted against RFK Jr. as the next health secretary, citing conspiracy theories. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I feel sorry for Mitch. And I was one of the people that led. He wanted to go to the end and he wanted to stay leader. He's not equipped mentally. He wasn't equipped 10 years ago mentally, in my opinion. He'd let the Republican Party go to hell. If I didn't come along, the Republican Party wouldn't even exist right now. Mitch McConnell never really had it. He had an ability to raise money because of his position as leader, which anybody could do. You could do it even, and that's saying a lot. But the fact is that he raised money and he gave a lot of money to senators, and so he had a little loyalty based on the fact that as leader you could raise a lot of money. Senators would call me and they say, he wants to give me 20, 25 million, can I take it? I'd say, take the money, take the money. But he engendered a certain amount of, I don't even call it loyalty, he was able to get votes. But I was the one that got him to drop out of the leadership position, so he can't love me. But he's not voting against Bobby, he's voting against me, but that's all right. He endorsed me. Mitch, do you know that Mitch endorsed me, right?
Well, he did.
You think that was easy? What?
He had polio, obviously, and his.
I don't know. I don't know anything about he had polio. He had polio.
Are you doubting that he had polio?
I have no idea if he had polio. All I can tell you about him is that he shouldn't have been leader. He knows that. He voted against Bobby. He votes against almost everything now. He's a very bitter guy, and we have a very strong party. And he's almost not even really a very powerful member. I'd say he's not he's lost his power, and it's affected his vote. And it's one of those things. But in the meantime, Bobby did great, got more votes than anybody thought, and I think he's going to do phenomenally, just phenomenally in that position. And everybody else likewise did well. Not only well, they got more votes than anybody thought. Tulsi, look at how she did. She did great. Marco got 99 votes. How about that? And Marco got 99 votes. And Marco, by the way, I have to tell you, Marco Rubio's done a fantastic job. He's been a great Secretary of State. They're all doing great. But we're going to have a swearing in today, and maybe we're going to have a second one because I hear we have a couple of them coming up. And the man behind me is doing a fantastic job, Secretary of Commerce. And I think you're going to see something very big come from today's signing. This is going to be a very important signing. Okay?
On U.S. Steel, sir, can I ask very quickly? You said you'd meet with the head of that company and the Japanese company.
U.S. Steel is going to be here, and a lot of the steel companies are coming. I think steel companies, they love what's happening to them. We saved it. If I didn't do the tariffs from my first term, you wouldn't have one steel company here. You wouldn't have one steel. There wouldn't be a steel company alive in the United States. And right now, they're going to be thriving. They're doing very well, but they're going to be thriving. They're going to be coming out. People are going to want to buy those steel companies like crazy.
Are you still planning to mediate talks between Nippon Steel and U.S. Steel?
Yeah, I don't know. I think U.S. Steel right now has all the power. The tariffs have given U.S. Steel a new lease on life. Okay? Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go.